Should we increase the minimum wage? Part 1. Let's talk about it. The federal minimum wage was introduced in 1938 during the Great Depression under FDR. It was initially set at 25 cents per hour and has been increased by Congress 22 times, most recently in 2009 when it went from $6.55 to $7.25 an hour. 29 states plus DC have a minimum wage higher than the federal minimum wage. However, 1.8 million workers earn the federal minimum wage or below it. So let's talk about whether we should raise the minimum wage or we should leave it the same. For starters, raising the minimum wage would increase economic activity and spur job growth. The Economic Policy Institute stated that a minimum wage increase from the current rate of $7.25 an hour to $10.10 would inject $22.1 billion net into the economy and create about 85,000 new jobs over a 3-year phase-in period. Economists from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago predicted that a $1.75 increase in the federal minimum wage would increase aggregate household spending by $48 billion the following year, thus boosting GDP and leading to job growth. In 1994, New Jersey raised its minimum wage by 80 cents, while Pennsylvania did not. They found no indication that the rise in minimum wage reduced employment. There is little or no evidence of a negative association between minimum wages and employment. But the argument against increasing the minimum wage is that increasing the minimum wage would force businesses to lay off employees and raise unemployment levels. The Congressional Budget Office projected that a minimum wage increase from $7.25 to $10.10 would result in a loss of 500,000 jobs. In a survey of 1,213 businesses and human resource professionals, 38% of employers who currently pay minimum wage said they would lay off some employees if the minimum wage was raised. 54% said they would decrease hiring levels. San Francisco's Office of Economic Analysis said that an increase to $15 would reduce the city's employment by about 15,270 private sector jobs. A study in 2014 surveyed the 21 European Union countries that have a minimum wage and found that they had an average unemployment rate of 11.8%, about a third higher than the 7.9% average unemployment rate in the 7 EU countries that have no minimum wage. But how about the argument that increasing the minimum wage would reduce poverty? A person working full-time at the minimum wage of $7.25 per hour earns $15,080 in a year, which is 20% higher than the 2015 poverty level of $12,331. Increasing the minimum wage to $9 would lift 300,000 people out of poverty, and an increase of $10.10 would lift 900,000 people out of poverty. It's estimated that increasing the minimum wage to $10.10 is projected to reduce the number of non-elderly living in poverty by about 4.6 million people, or by 6.8 million when longer-term effects are accounted for. But some say raising the minimum wage would increase poverty. A study from the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland found that although low-income workers see wage increases when the minimum wage is raised, their hours and employment decline, and the combined effect of these changes is a decline in earning income. Minimum wages increase the proportion of families that are poor or near poor. The higher the wages are, the higher cost of productions are. The higher cost of productions are, the higher prices are. The higher prices are, the smaller quantities of goods and services demanded and the number of workers employed in producing them. The net effect of higher minimum wages would be unfavorable for impoverished households, even if there are no job losses. To the extent that some poor households also lose jobs, their net losses would be greater. But a higher minimum wage would reduce government welfare spending, would it? If low-income workers earned more money, their dependence on and eligibility for government benefits would decrease. Raising the federal minimum wage by 6% would reduce spending on the SNAP program, formerly known as the food stamps, by 6% or $4.6 billion. By increasing the minimum wage further, more than 1.7 million Americans would no longer be dependent on government assistance programs. It's reported the increase would shave $7.6 billion off annual government spending on income support programs. But on the other side, a minimum wage increase would hurt businesses and force companies to close. 60% of small business owners say that raising the minimum wage will hurt most small business owners. Some companies are saying that they would be forced to close almost half their stores and let go thousands of workers if the federal minimum wage were raised to $15. Forbes reported that an increase in minimum wage has led to the closure of several Walmart stores and the cancellation of promised stores yet to come. But there's the argument that the minimum wage has not kept up with inflation. Because the minimum wage is not indexed for inflation, its purchasing power, the number of goods that can be bought with a unit of currency, has dropped considerably since its peak in 1968. The minimum wage in 1968 was $1.60, which is equivalent to $11.16 in 2016 dollars, which is 53.9% higher than today's $7.25. Between 2015 and the last increase in the minimum wage in 2009, the federal minimum wage lost 8.1% of its purchasing power to inflation. Inflation indexing guarantees low-wage workers a wage that keeps up with the rising costs of goods and services. Raising the minimum wage and indexing it to inflation would ensure that low-wage workers could adopt a standard of living comparable with the current economy. But then there's an argument that raising the minimum wage would increase the price of consumer goods. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago stated that if the minimum wage is increased, fast food restaurants would pass on almost 100% of their increased labor costs onto consumers, and that other firms may do the same. Raising the wage of fast food employees to $15 or $22 per hour would result in a price increase of 4.3% to 25% respectively, or a reduction in product size between 12% and 70%. A hamburger would be much smaller. NBC News found that the price of a cup of coffee went up by 10 to 20% in Oakland, California after a 36% minimum wage hike in the city to $12.25. There was also a 6.7% rise in coffee prices in Chicago after the minimum wage rose to $10. Even hotels in Canada found that a sudden and significant increase to the minimum wage results in an increased price for food and beverage, guest rooms, and meeting facilities. Though there's an argument that improvements in productivity and economic growth have outpaced increases in the minimum wage. While the estimates of how much the minimum wage increase would vary, many economists agree that if they had kept pace with rising production and income, it would be higher than the current $7.25 per hour. The federal minimum wage would have been $21.72 per hour in 2012, instead of $7.25, if the minimum wage had kept pace with increases in productivity since 1968. It was estimated in 2012 that personal income has grown by 100.6% since 1968, while the minimum wage has been stagnated. America as a whole is an outlier among advanced economies. One would expect in America, where GDP per person is $53,000, to pay a minimum wage around $12 an hour. That would mean a rise of about 65% for Americans earning the minimum wage rate. Well, the argument against this is that teenagers and young adults may be shut out of the workforce if the minimum wage is increased. 16 to 24-year-olds make up 50.4% of minimum wage earners, despite representing only 13.7% of the workforce as a whole. 24% of minimum wage workers are teenagers. The minimum wage has a devastating impact on teenagers because firms will not pay many young folks with no skills or experience minimum wage, let alone a higher wage. Casey Mulligan, an economics professor at the University of Chicago, stated that the Teenage Employment Index fell sharply after the minimum wage increase in July 2009, a fall of about 8% in 3 months, while the previous drop of 8% took over a year. This suggests that the 2009 minimum wage increase did significantly reduce teenage employment. Those experiencing unemployment at an early age have years of lower earnings and an increased likelihood of unemployment ahead of them. If you want to learn more about the argument, check out part 2. I'll leave a link down below. If you like this video, hit that like button, consider subscribing. I talk about money and everything related to it, so don't miss out. And as always, take care of your money.